Hello everyone and welcome to the session on Docker, and today we are going to see Docker interview question answers. So I have listed some of the important Docker interview question answers. So today we will cover these questions. So let's get started. So this is the first question that the HR will ask you that can you tell me something about Docker container? So the simplest answer is that in simple terms, Docker container consists of applications, all their dependencies, they are shared kernel and system resource with other containers and run as isolated system in the host operating system. And the third point is the main aim of a Docker container is to get rid of the infrastructure dependencies while deploying and running applications. This means that any containerized application can run on any platform irrespective of the infrastructure being used beneath. Technically, they are just the runtime instance of a Docker image. The second question, what are Docker images? So the Docker images they are executable packages bundled with the application code and dependencies, software packages, etc. For the purpose of creating containers, Docker images can be developed to any Docker environment and the container can be spun up there to run the application. The third question, what is a Dockerfile? So it is a text file that has all commands which need to be run for a building a given image. So you can see and understand, I have already told you and teach you that how the Docker file has been created. The process of creating image from the Docker file, that is, first we need to create a simple Docker file, and after that we just inside a Docker file we provide some instructions command like run, ENTRYPOINT, build, CMD. So these are the commands we want to use in a Docker file to build an image. So when the image has been built, by using the image, we can start our container. So this is the whole process of a simple Docker file, creating of a simple Docker container. The fourth question is, what is the functionality of hypervisor? A hypervisor is a software that makes virtualization happens because of which is sometimes referred to as a virtual machine monitor. This divides the resource of the host system and allocate them to each Quest environment installed. So as you see in a figure that there's a hardware architecture, and by using the hardware we run the hypervisor with the help of operating system, and then the hypervisor will produce the operating systems, the multiple operating system, that is OS 1, OS 2, operating system 1, operating system 2, operating system 3. So, but we can only build inside a hypervisor with a limited operating system, because every operating system in a hypervisor will use the system RAM, the system kernel. The first thing is the system kernel. But in a virtualization, the operating system will not use the kernel, Linux kernel or a Windows kernel, right? So that's why the hypervisor is not good for the virtualization, because all operating system are use only the single kernel. This means that multiple OS can be installed on a single host system. Hypervisor are of two types. The first type is native hypervisor and the second type is hosted hypervisor. So let's understand the native hypervisor. This type is also called a bare metal hypervisor. The native hypervisor is also called as bare metal hypervisor and runs directly on the underlying host system, which also ensure direct access to the host hardware, which is why it does not require a base operating system. Now understand the hosted hypervisor These types make use of the underlying host operating system which has the existing OS installed. So that's the difference between the native hypervisor and the hosted hypervisor. Now question 5, what tell about the Docker Compose? So the Docker Compose is a YAML file consisting of all the details regarding the various services such as networks and volumes that are needed for setting up a Docker based application. So Docker Compose is used for creating multiple containers, host them, and stabilize communication between them. For the purpose of communication amongst the containers, ports are exposed by each and every container. So that means we can forward our port by using Docker Compose. So I already demonstrate you the exposing of the port in Docker Compose. So this is the question 6, that can you tell something about the Docker namespace? So let's understand the namespace. A namespace is basically a Linux feature that ensure OS resources partition in a mutually exclusive manner. This forms the core concept behind containerization, as the namespace introduce a layer of isolation amongst the container. In a Docker, the namespace ensure that the containers are portable and they don't affect the underlying host. Examples for namespace types that are currently being supported by Docker PID, mount, user, network, IPC. So this is called Docker namespace. The 7th question is, what is the Docker command that lists the status of all Docker containers? It's a simple. In order to get the status of the all containers, we can run the below command, that is docker ps-a, and we can also run the docker container ls-a, because the ps command is the oldest command in the Docker. The latest command is docker container ls-a. Now the 8th question is, on what circumstance will you lose data stored in a container? The data of the containers remains in it unless you delete the container. Yes, of course, when we remove the container, the data will be removed. But if we don't, we just stop the container and we don't remove them, then all of the data of the container will be remaining until we don't remove the container or delete the container. Now the 9th question is, what is a Docker image registry? A Docker image registry, in a simple terms, is an area where the Docker images are stored. Instead of converting the application to containers each and every time, and developer can directly use the images stored in the registry. So this image registry can either be public or private, and Docker Hub is the most popular and famous public registry available on internet. Now the 10th question is, how many Docker components are there? So there are 3 Docker components. They are Docker clients, Docker host, and Docker registry. Let's understand the Docker clients first. This is the component performance build and run operation for the purpose of opening communication with the Docker host. Now the Docker host is, this component has the main Docker daemon and the host container and their associated images. The daemon stabilizes a connection with the Docker registry. Now the Docker registry, this components store the Docker images. There can be a public registry or a private one. So the most famous public registry are Docker Hub and Docker Cloud. So as the figure, you can easily understand that there is a client, Docker host, and Docker registry. So on a Docker client, we execute commands like docker build, docker pull, and docker run. And these commands will forward it to the Docker host. Inside a Docker host, there is a Docker daemon which will read our commands. So inside a command, it will take the image. It will focus on image. If the image is present in their daemon, like here, like Stack and the Alpine, Linux, Ubuntu, MySQL. If the image has been exist in their daemon, then the image will be go inside a container, and the container will be go to the client desktop. If the Docker daemon has not exist the image, then the Docker daemon will be forwarded the request to the Docker registry. And the Docker registry is a public registry to store all types of possible images. So it is fetching the image from the Docker registry, that is Alpine, and download it into the Docker daemon. And after that, the image will be go inside a container and then go to the client desktop with the command docker run. The 11th question is, what is a Docker Hub? So it is a public cloud-based registry provided by Docker for storing public images of the containers along with the provision of finding and sharing them. The images can be pushed to the Docker Hub through the Docker push command. The 12th question is, what command can you run to export a Docker image as an archive? So this can be done using the docker save command, and syntax is docker save -o and the exported tar name, which you provide the name here, and the container name, which is already running inside a Docker. The 13th question is, what command can be run to import and pre-exported Docker images into another Docker host? So the answer is, this can be done using the docker load command, and syntax is docker load -i, the name you want to provide, and then .tar. 14th question, can I paused container be removed from a Docker? So the answer is no. It is not possible. A container must be in the stopped state before we can remove it. Yes, without stopping the container, we cannot remove any containers. First, we need to stop this container, then we can remove the container. But if there is a command called docker container rm-f container id, by using this command, the running container will be removed. So what will be the happened in the background by using the rm-f command? This will stop first the container and then remove it. Question number 15. What command is used to check for the version of a Docker client and server? So the command used to get all the version information of the client and the server is Docker version. To get only the server version details, we can check Docker version -- format. So this is the format method, and provide the curly braces and .server .version. So this will print the good way of output of the version numbers. We can check this by using the practical, because we didn't do this command at all. So let's provide the Docker version -- format and .server .vrsion version. So this is the command to print the Docker version server version. So when I run this, it is saying version 1.9 executing version at server.version, can't evaluate field server type system info. So maybe we need to provide capital S and capital V. Now run this. Yeah. So finally it will print only the version of a Docker directly. But if we remove this kind of flags and switches, and then I execute the Docker version, it will print many more things, right? And you can also like the server and the version. Go version and the version. So the question number 16, differentiate between copy and add command that are used in a Dockerfile. So let's differentiate. Both the commands have a similar functionality, but the copy is more preferred because of its higher transparency level than that of add. In compare of add, the copy is more preferable. Copy provides just the basic support of a copying local files into the container, whereas the add command provides additional feature like a remote URL and the tar extraction support. So that's why the add command is better than copy command. This is the difference. Now the question number 17, can a container restart by itself? So let's understand. Yes, it is possible only while using certain Docker defined policies. While using the Docker run command, the following are the available policies. The policies are, these are the 4 policies we need to follow to restart the container by itself. So first policy is off. In this, the container won't be restart in case it's stopped or it fails. If the container is already stopped mode and failed mode, then it cannot be restarted itself. So this is the first policy. Now the second policy is on failure. Here the container restart by itself only when it experience failures not the associated with the user. The third point is unless stop. Using this policy, ensure that a container can restart only when the command is executed to stop it by the user. So if the command has been executed by the user to stop the container, then the policy will be satisfied to restart the container by itself. And the fourth point is irrespective of a failure or is stopping, the container always gets restarted in this type of policy. So this policy can be used as docker container run hyphen detach it and then hyphen hyphen restart flag is consist as a restart policy value, right? And the container name or the container ID, you can put any. 18th question, that is, can you tell the difference between the Docker image and the layer? So image, first difference is the image. This is the built up from a series of read-only layers of our instructions. An image corresponds to the Docker container and is used to speedy operation due to the caching mechanism of each step. Now, what is the layer? Each layer corresponds to an instructions of the images Dockerfile. In a simple words, the layer is also an image, but it is the image of instructions run. So consider the example Dockerfile below, that is this. So importantly, each layer is only a set of reference from the layer before it. So the result of building this Dockerfile is an image, whereas the instructions present in this file add the layers to the image. The layers can be thought of as intermediate images. In the example above, there are 4 instructions, hence 4 layers are added to the resultant image. So 19th question, where are the Docker volumes stored in a Docker? So the volumes are created and managed by Docker and cannot be accessed by non-Docker entities. They are stored in a Docker host file system at warlib Docker volumes. This is the Linux operating system path for the volume store. 20 question, that is what does the docker info command do? The command gets detailed information about Docker installed on the host system. The information can be like what is the number of containers or images and in a what state they are running and hardware specification like a total memory allocated, speed of the processor and kernel version. Question number 21. Tell me the most commonly used instructions in a Docker file. So the first instructions is from. This is used to set the base image for upcoming instructions. A Docker file is considered to be valid if it start with the from instructions. And the second one is the label instructions. This is used for the image organization based on the projects, modules or licensing. It also helps in automation as we specify a key value pair while defining a label that can be later accessed and handled programmatically. The third instructions is the run instructions. That is, this command is used to execute instructions following it on the top of the current image in a new layer. So note that with each run command execution, we add layers on a top of the image and then use that in a subsequent steps. And the fourth command is CMD instructions. This command is used to provide default values of an executing container. In cases of multiple CMD commands, the last instructions would be considered. Question number 22. What is the way to stabilize communication between Docker host and Linux host? This can be done using networking by identifying the ipconfig or ifconfig command on the Docker host. This command ensures that an Ethernet adapter is created as long as the Docker is present in the host. Question number 23. What is the best way of deleting a container? So the answer is we need to follow the following two steps for deleting a container. That is, first we need to stop the container and then we need to remove the container by using rm command. So these are the two commands we followed: docker stop container id and then docker rm container id to deleting a container. This is the best way. Question number 24. Can you tell the difference between CMD and entry points? So the CMD command provides executable default for an executing container. In case the executable has to be omitted, then the usage of entry point instructions along with the JSON array format has to be incorporated. Entry point specify that the instructions within it will always be run when the container starts. This command provides an option to configure the parameter and the executables. If the Dockerfile does not have this command, then it would be still get inherited from the base image mentioned in the from instructions. The most commonly used entry point is /bin/bash/bin/sh for most of the base images. As the part of good practice, every Dockerfile should have at least one of these two commands. Question number 25. So the 25 question number is that can we use JSON instead of a YAML file while developing a Docker Compose file in a Docker? So as you know, we already covered this. We have been created a JSON file with the help of YAML file content by using the online websites. So the answer is yes, it can be used in order to run Docker Compose with JSON. So the whole command for the executing the JSON file to create a Docker Compose, the command is docker compose -f and then docker compose.json, and then the up command can be used to create a Docker Compose. And you can also provide any name with .json. It will be worked as far as a YAML file. The next question is that how many containers you can run in a Docker and what are the factors influencing this limit? So the answer is there is no clearly defined limit to the number of containers that can be run within a Docker, but it all depends on the limitations, more especially hardware restrictions, the size of our app, and the CPU resources available are two important factors influencing this limit. In case your application is not a very big and you have abundant CPU resources, then we can run a huge number of containers. The next question, are you able to remove a paused container in a Docker? So no, we cannot remove the paused container from the Docker. You can only remove the container when it is the stopped state. So if the container is stopped, you can remove them. But the container is the paused state, you cannot remove them. You have to be unpaused and then stop them, and after that you can remove them. The next question is it good if you run stateful application over Docker? So the answer is the concept of statement applications says that their data gets stored on the local file system. So when you move the
application to another device, it will become difficult for you to retrieve data. So we do not recommended running stateful application here. Next question, is it okay to run compose in a production? So the answer is yes. As per our experience, using Docker Compose in production is among its top applications. In the process of defining application with Compose, you can use it in a various stages of production such as CI, testing, staging, and etc. The next question, does Docker supports IP version 6? So the answer is yes, Docker does support IP version 6. However, IP version 6 networking is only supported on Docker daemons. Running on Linux hosts, support for IP version 6 address has been there since Docker Engine 1.5 release. To enable IP version 6 support in the Docker daemon, you need to edit /etc/docker/daemon.json and set the IP version 6 key to true. So as you can see, the daemon.json file, you have to be write with the curly braces and double quotes IP version 6 and then colon true statements. And after that, you can use IP version 6 in a Docker. Ensure that you reload the Docker configuration file. After the changes in the file, you have to be reload and restart your Docker to make changes and make effect. You can now create networks with the IP version 6 flag and assign containers IP version 6 addressing using the IP version 6 flag. The next question, what is the main advantage of containers over a virtual machine? There are many advantages, but the main advantage is that as compared to a virtual machine, containers use less resources and give a saving of around 20%. The next question, is booting a container slow as compared to VM? So the answer is no. Containers boots very fast as compared to VM because each VM has its own operating system to boot, whereas a container uses the host operating system and it just to initiate container runtime. The next question, what is Alpine Linux and why should developer care of it? The answer is it is very tiny self-contained Linux container based on muscle libs and busybox. A developer must always use Alpine image to save space and reduce code footprint. You can find it here. https alpinelinux.org is the main website or official website for the Alpine Linux. The next question, what is the significance of a scratch image in a Docker? The answer is it is a totally empty image used for building a new images from scratch. The next question, what is the difference between the commands docker run and docker create? So let's understand. The answer is docker run and docker create both is used for container creation, but the end result is different. Docker create command creates the container in a stopped state and it is stored and the output container ID for use later, whereas docker run command creates and simultaneously execute the container. So that's the main difference between the docker run and docker create command. The next question is, what is the difference between virtualization and containerization? So the answer is virtualization is the process of abstracting a physical machine, whereas containerization is the process of abstracting an application. The next question, what is the use of .dockerignore file? So let's understand that developers generally create a file named .dockerignore along with the main Docker file in the same directory, and .dockerignore contains a list of all the files and directories that need to be executed while copying folders onto the image. It contains a pattern and all the files that do not match it are added to the image. This way it saves disk space and conserves network bandwidth. The next question, Dockerfile can be written in which two formats? So the answer is Dockerfile can be written in both JSON and YAML file formats. Question number 39. what all drivers are available in pre-R1.9 release of a Docker engine. The following drivers are available in pre-R1.9 release a Docker engine. That is bridge, that is a default driver for the containers, and the none driver, host driver. So these are the three drivers which is assigned to the Docker normally. The next question is, what is the prime use of Docker volumes? The answer is Docker volumes are used for various purposes. Some of them are listed below, such as Docker volume bypass the copy on write system to obtain native disk input output performance. This way, some files remain out of the Docker commit. You can share same directory between multiple containers and can achieve inter-container communication. You can share same directory between the host and container. You can share single file between the host and a container. The next question, how can you debug inside a container? The answer is you can do so by using docker exec command. Using this command, you can run a new process in a running container and you can get a bash shell prompt inside a existing container with this command and can debug in a real time. The next question, what are the advantages of DevOps? There are two types of advantage, that is technical benefits and business benefits. So let's understand the technical benefits. Continuous software delivery, less complex problem to fix, faster resolution of our problems. So these are the technical benefits. Now the business benefits, faster delivery of features, more stable operating environments, more time available to add value rather than fix and maintain. The next question, what is the function of CI, that is continuous integration server? CI server function is to continuously integrate all changes being made and committed to repository by different developers and check for compile errors. It needs to build code several times a day, preferably after every commit, so it can detect which commit made the breakage if the breakage happens. The next question, what is a node in Docker? Docker swarms are made of single or multiple nodes. These nodes offer two types, manager nodes and worker node. Their functionalities vary based on their responsibilities. The manager mode responsibility is that manager node in a Docker handle tasks that are related to cluster management. They offer a maintenance of a cluster management scheduled Docker service and also add swarm mode HTTP API endpoints. The worker nodes are different from manager nodes and they don't participate in any of the tasks that manager nodes do. Their only purpose is to carry out containers. The relation between a manager node and a worker node is you can easily create a manager node, but to create a worker node, you will need at least one manager node. The next question, mention some benefits that Docker provides to IT firms. The answer is Docker enhances the functionality of an IT firm by a constant of 10. It modernizes the IT environment and makes application updates and change much easier. This is possible because containers run independently on any infrastructure. In a nutshell, Docker improves application reliability and availability, making it easier for IT firms to proactively manage security risk. The next question, can I run several processes in a Docker containers? So the answer is Docker is used for the virtualization of the application. This is why it is ethical to run a single process in a Docker containers. Hence, it is discouraged to run more than one process in a one container because it can hamper the efficiency and smooth operation of the container. However, there are some forced ways to run more than one process in a Docker container. To do this, you will have to start with creating a Dockerfile that can begin with several processes. The next question is, how many containers can run on each host? The number of containers running per host depends on the capability of the environment, the characteristic and size of the application in each container, the performing availability of the CPU, and so on. However, make sure that containers make the most efficient use of the available resources. The next question: can Docker container pack up a complete OS? Docker container only package up the application, including everything that your application needs for performing. Docker containers don't have to package up the whole operating system in order to deploy your application easily. This is one of the reasons why Docker containers are so light. The next question: what is Docker's privileged mode? Docker containers usually run in unprivileged mode. This doesn't allow you to run a Docker daemon within a container. However, in the Docker privileged mode, Docker containers is given access to all of its device. Docker privileged mode enables access to all devices that are currently located on the host. It also sets systems layout in AppArmor as well as in a security enhanced Linux. This offers Docker containers at the same level of access while the process is running on the host. The next question: explain the life cycle of a Docker container. So this is the top to bottom life cycle of the Docker container, that is building a container, operating the container, pausing the container, that is optional, unpause the container, it is also optional, starting the container, stop the container, and restart the container, remove the container, and destroying the container. This is the all of the life cycle of the particular single container. So in the figure out, you can see that first we have to create them. After the created the container, you can also delete them, and if you don't delete, you have to just start the container. When the container has been started, you have some options like start container and stop container, or you can also pause container and unpause container. And after the stopped container, you can also remove that container, but you cannot remove the paused container. So this is the life cycle of the container. The next question: what are container orchestration and its use? Container orchestration helps in maintaining and managing the containers running in a large and dynamic environment. It can automate and control the tasks such as load balancing, scaling of containers, monitoring the health of hosts, and containers, switching containers from one host to another when the host lacks resources or unavailable. Allocation of resources between containers, provisioning and deployment of our containers. The next question is: what are the different types of virtualization? So there are mainly three different types of virtualization, that is para virtualization, emulation, and container based virtualization. So these are the three types of virtualization. The next question is: what is Docker machine? Docker machine is a mechanism that allows users on a virtual host to install Docker engine. These virtual hosts can now be managed using the commands of a Docker machine. Docker machine also give individual provision cluster of Docker swarm. The next question: what do you mean by memory swap flag? So the memory swap refers to a modified flag process that only has worth if the memory is also set. Swap provides the container to communicate and express memory specification and the requirements to disk when the container has consumed all the memory that are RAM that is available to it. The next question: why is Docker monitoring important? So the answer is Docker monitoring assists in identifying problems proactively that would help in avoiding system outages. The monitoring time series data present insight to the fine-tuned application for better robustness and performance. The container-based environment changes are essential, and the impact of that too gets monitored and controlled indirectly. With the complete monitoring in place, modification could be safely rolled out as a problems will be deleted early on and be resolved immediately before that converts into the root cause in an outage. The next question, what do you mean by Docker objects? So the answer is Docker objects include three different terms, and those are Docker images, Docker service, and Docker containers. Images are read-only template with specific instructions for building a Docker container. Service help enable the containers to scale across various Docker daemons that all work together as a swarm. Containers manage a runnable instance of an image. The next question, what are the different types of mount kinds available in a Docker? So there are three different types of mounts available in a Docker, that is bind mounts, tempfs mount, temporary file systems, and volume mount. The next question, where all do you think Docker is being used? When asked such as a question, respond by talking about application of a Docker. Docker is being used in the following areas, like simplifying configuration. Docker lets you put your environment and configuration into code and deploy it. Code pipeline management. There are different systems used for development and production. As the code travel from development to testing to production, it goes through a different in the environment. Docker helps in maintaining the code pipeline consistency. Developer productivity. Using Docker for development gives us two things. We are closer to production and development environment is built faster. Application isolation. As containers are applications wrapped together with all dependencies, your apps are isolated. They can work by themselves on any hardware that support Docker. Debugging capabilities. Docker supports various debugging tools that are not specific to containers but work well with containers. Multi-tenancy. Docker lets you have multi-tenant application, avoiding redundancy in your codes and deployments. Rapid deployment. Docker eliminates the need to boost an entire operating system from scratch, reducing the deployment time. The next question, how far do Docker containers scale? Are there any requirement for the same? The answer is large web deployment like Google and Twitter and platform providers such as Heroku and .cloud all run on container technology. Containers can be scaled to hundreds of thousands or even millions of them running in a parallel. Talking about requirements, containers require the memory and the operating system at all the times and a way to use this memory efficiently when scaled. The next question and the last question is that, will cloud overtake the use of containerization? Docker containers are gaining popularity, but at the same time, cloud services are giving a good fight. In my personal opinion, Docker will never be replaced by cloud. Using Docker cloud services with containerization will definitely hype the game. Organizations need to take their requirements and dependencies into consideration, into the picture, and decide what's the best for them. Most of the companies have integrated Docker with the cloud. This is way they can make the best out of the both technologies. Thank you for watching.